Hey, welcome to the Open House Show. We'll get right started this week. We have a great, panel of guests this week. We have Kristen Mariotti with the Stoneleigh-Burnham School returning with us, and we also have Jack Sweeney returning. They're going to be talking respectively about our topic today, tuition resets. Is this an inevitable tactic that independent schools are going to have to employ? What are some questions around the beginning conversations, how you implemented it, and how it's affecting enrollment? I'm excited to talk about this topic. I think it's on a lot of people's minds. If it's not, definitely a conversation that might be coming your way. So let's bring them on without further ado. Got Jack here. Hey, Jack. Hey, Kristen.
Hey.
All right. So, you've been on the show before. We don't need to, kill it, a ton of time. But, I'd love for you, Kristen, if you wanted to introduce yourself, give a small plug about Stoneleigh-Burnham, tell them a little bit about the school as well. And then we can kind of jump in through some topics.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jesse, for having me back. And I'm so pleased to be here to talk about this topic, something I've been working on for several years in my current position. So my name is Kristen Mariotti, as you mentioned, and I'm the Assistant Head of School for Enrollment Management and Strategy at Stoneleigh-Burnham School. We are located in beautiful Western Massachusetts in the Pioneer Valley, and we are an all-girls 7 through 12 and PG boarding and day school. And we attract students from all over the United States and the world, and have a pretty small enrollment. We're a small school of about 150 girls.
Okay, excellent. Always, you have the added challenges of the boarding market this year. So, but that's another show altogether. Jack, what say you, sir?
I say thank you, Jesse, for having me back. I was surprised to get a second invite back. My name is Jack Sweeney. I'm the Director of Advancement at the new school, which is located in Northwest Arkansas, Fayetteville, Arkansas. So we are a 12-month to 12th grade school, day school that basically serves the Northwest Arkansas community. And so we have been we started the tuition reset back in November, December, and it's been great for us. We've experienced a lot of successes, really no negatives at all.
Awesome. Well, I want to jump right into it. Kristen, Jack, I'll start with you, Kristen. But, if you can tell me, in your respective schools, how did this conversation start? Obviously we go to conferences, we hear about this topic come up. It's in the trend books of everyone. It is something that's being considered heavily. It's not right for everyone. So, there is that conversation starter. So, how did that process start at your school?
Right. Well, I think, for me, it was all about accessibility. And when I came to Stoneleigh-Burnham 3 years ago, as the new director of admission, I jumped right in and took a look at the local market. So when I first got there, I was thinking, boarding tuition reset down the line, but really let's think about day student tuition reset, because we had seen, or the school had seen over the years, kind of a decline, especially in our middle school enrollment for local students.
Mm-hmm.
So I did a deep dive into the data and the demographic, research in the area, and realized that we were really, and it didn't take long to find this out, we were really priced far out of our market in the local area. Families in our current enrollment situation, our current families most were not paying the full day tuition. So we were using a lot of financial aid to attract day families. And we just really felt like if we could lower the tuition, we might avoid some of the sticker shock that was preventing families to even look at us, because they were just, well, I can't afford that because it's a private school, so we're just not even going to look. So it was really about making things more accessible to our local community, being more of a part of the community, not sort of this school on the hill, but a part of the Greenfield, certainly, and the wider Pioneer Valley community. So it's been a really good. I started that my first year. It took about a year to present to the board and do all of the research. And I mean, I can talk more about that process later on, but that was sort of where it came from, is, why aren't the local families looking at us, and why is that declining so much? And it was pretty clear right away that we needed to make a change in this way.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you 100%. There's a lot of markets that are going in that direction, and Jack, I don't know if it was a similar situation with the day student population kind of ringing the alarm for you, or the enrollment in general, since you're a day school. How did that process start with you?
Well, like Kristen said, I mean, it was all about accessibility first. But this is my third year here, and what we've been seeing is families withdraw, and you do exit surveys and you ask, the questions, why did you withdraw? And they say the tuition was getting too high. And so, for example, our 9 through 12 was about $19,000. It was $19,000 this year. And then it went down to like 17, 16, and then all the way down to 15 for our early childhood. And so when we started the tuition conversation, I basically took a notepad and kind of said, what if we did this? What if we reset everything back down to amount? I talked to Kristen. I talked about a couple other people to find out how it worked for them. Mm-hmm. And, I think initially when I brought it into the CFO and our head of school, they thought I was crazy. But, we had months and months of conversation, and then we brought the board in. And we realized after a couple of board conversations that we weren't going low enough, because we had originally said we were going to bring it to about 16 or 16.5. And they voted to go 15.4 across the board, K through 12. And so our current families have been very excited about it. And then, working with Schoolcraft and some other marketing, that we've been doing in-house, the amount of tours and what we're doing. I mean, so it's showing promise. Mm-hmm. And what we've actually done is we decided we're going to reset everything. We're going to reset our summer tuition, reset our summer camps. And so, not that we have to be comparable. There's only 2 independent schools in Northwest Arkansas. Right. Probably, the parochials are probably the lowest, obviously, for tuition, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. And we can't go that low, but at least we're now in the conversation with public school families to take a look at us.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Kristen. I'd love to hear, how do you sell that to the board? What was their response? I know that, Jack was talking about, that's where that conversation went to, and they were involved in that process. How did it look on your end? What was the response from the heads of school or the boards?
Great question. So, I mean, you have to imagine me coming into a school, brand new admissions director. They had an admissions director at the school for 10 years before me. So, I was coming into a position that had been filled for a long time. And the first thing I brought up at our first board meeting in August, after I'd been at the school for about a month and a half, was I think we need to reset the day tuition. And so, as Jack said, it was sort of like, mouth dropping, and why would we lower the price if we're not at the place where we want to be enrollment wise anyway. Mm-hmm. But, I have an incredibly, and I'm lucky in this sense, and I know that I have a very supportive and engaged board of really, really smart people from all different backgrounds and different, jobs and, finance, and we have marketing people, and we have all these really great board members, a lot of alumni of the school. So women that really feel very strongly about Stoneleigh-Burnham and the education that they received. So I have a pretty supportive board, which was great. They were initially skeptical, of course, because anytime you say we're going to lower the cost of something, we think, well, you're going to have to bring in 500 more people to make that. But really, when I presented the data, and I did a lot of data analysis before this happened, and I put a pretty substantial report together for them in conjunction with my CFO and my head of school, it showed that the risk was so minimal for us. And the reward was not going to make us rich. It was not a get rich quick scheme, as I've said before, probably in my last podcast, but it was going to be something that could help sustain our day student enrollment. And, conversely to Jack's tuition, which, is a bit lower than the New England region day right. for at least the schools that have boarding programs, our day tuition was almost $37,000. So you think about a family who, and then there's other day schools in the area that were charging 15, 18, 20. So we were just not even being considered by families that could potentially afford 20, but not 40. So it really didn't take much to convince. It took a while to get the data together to make sure that I had a good argument. And obviously after, I know later on in the show, we'll talk a little bit about what the results were, but thankfully I had a pretty supportive board. But I do encourage anyone who's thinking of doing this, to make sure you have your data. I mean, we always say it, data, data, and you're going to need it even more if you start thinking about boarding resets.
And you know, you're talking huge risk factors. I mean, that's probably the scariest part when you start this journey. It's like, you know, how do I get this number? You know, if we lower tuition, you know, we're going to need, like you were saying, you know, X amount of extra students. How are we going to get them? Is that even in the market? You know, you don't want to go to the board or to the head of school with, you know, hey, here's this idea and nothing to show for it, you know. So that process of, you know, trying to figure out exactly, you know, what your market is, because like you said, Massachusetts is very different than Arkansas. And you know, there's many places all across the country, even in the same state sometimes, that are just totally different markets. And what is a good fit for you, whether this is a good idea. I'd be curious, you know, Jack, what was some of the research? What were some of the strategies that you took in trying to build that fact base to present?
Well, going back exactly what Kristen said, the data was so important. So looking at the 5-year average, looking at the 5 years of what we've done. And as I've mentioned before, you know, we raised tuition close to 8% 2 years ago. So, you know, looking at the exit surveys, the demographic data was really important, finding out the incomes, finding out, you know, where we were lacking in students coming from different zip codes. And then really, for us, because we're in the day market, it was marketing. When I talked to Kristen back in the fall, you know, she told me about a billboard that they did, and so, you know, we did the same thing. You know, we put a billboard on I-49, and you know, just the little things that we could get people out there. But the demographic data was probably the most important for us, because we weren't hitting the right people. We weren't attracting the right people to give us a call or come by for a tour. So. You know, a smart board, a good board, and that was our board, wanted all that data. There's no way we could have walked in there and said, this is a great idea, without having that to kind of back it up. So we had probably, I want to say, a half a dozen, if not one or two more board meetings before we finalized it, before we actually went to the real board. We had finance committee meetings, you know, we met with families. So it was a lot of work, but I'm glad it got done.
No, for sure. I mean, that kind of process is such a big change for an institution, any institution, much less one that is just on this progressive sliding scale of more expensive. To change something like that is really going to rattle the cages. It's going to be a long process. Kristen, you know, did you have some different experiences with that? Was there anything else that you did that maybe was a little bit more regionally that you needed to do with your research and insights?
No, I mean, I think what Jack has discussed is a lot of the things that I did. I think it's also, you know, you mentioned these big changes and how hard that is for a board to understand. This is also like a philosophical and mindset change. This is not just about, you know, looking at demographics and saying it's too expensive, but this is really about, you know, a lot of the pushback I have heard for other schools and in some of the work that I did was, well, you know, such and such a school is this much and they're still raising tuition. So why would we make this? Is that saying something about Stoneleigh-Burnham School? Or is it saying that our education is not as good because we're not charging as much? And I think it's really that shifting of a mindset that is really, really hard for some people to get their heads around, is that, you know, just because you're charging 3% more every single year until the end of time does not make your program or any of your, you know, offerings better than a school that is responding to the tuition crisis in the United States of America. So I think that there's that mindset piece that was a bit of a challenge for me, and really talking to, you know, for us, the easiest sell for my board was, you know, how many kids do we need to make up the loss in tuition that this will create? And for us, it was literally a handful of kids, like 6. So we, you know, got those 6 and added a bunch more and brought in some more revenue. So we didn't lose anything. There was no loss for us in our first year. And I think that's really, you know, if you can tell your board, this is a risk, of course, but especially if you're a school in a situation where the risk is so minimal, it's time to go for it.
Yeah, and when you talk about what you're going to need to make up that loss, I mean, there's a lot dependent on what kind of financial aid program you had. I mean, if you were giving out a ton of financial aid and now you're not because you've reduced the price, that may balance out to be not so many kids. It might not be as overwhelming as you might think it is. When you take into account money saved is money earned too. So I'd be curious, Jack. You get the approval. Let's talk about what were the first steps? What did we start? What were the motors that started turning once we got the boards like, hey, let's do this?
Yeah, so it was really how we were going to tell the story and of what we were doing. So I'll give you a plug right here, right now. We worked with you guys, and you guys really helped us try to figure out what we were going to do. We did a video from the head of school, kind of an announcement, but making sure we had everything in place. I mean, I can tell you about the boring stuff, about getting the contracts ready and getting the schedule of charges and all of that. But it was really, we chose January 11th for our launch date. And so we really centered everything around that. When we were ready to go, we were ready to go. And we pushed the button and, things started. So it was, it was being creative. It wasn't necessarily trying to, and I think with something like this, I mean, it is a reset. It's a one-off. Like, you can't go ahead and do this next year. You can't do this probably for another five or 10 years, maybe 5 years. But, we had to, I don't necessarily think that we had one shot at it, but the one shot, or the shot that we had this time, we had to make it as worthwhile and beneficial and as loud as we could.
Yeah. And hey, I appreciate the plug, of course. But that was definitely, I would imagine, a similar mentality. I mean, once you have some news like this, I mean, we share wins with average, normal games during a regular season, much less this kind of big cultural shift and financial shift and burden that you're relieving from families. You want to get that out. And you need to get it out hard as much as possible. Let everybody, scream it from the rooftops, kind of thing. And it's an interesting point. It's not to go on a tangent about the boring parts of it, but you don't even think about all of the documents that you need to update, and websites, and all these little check boxes that you need to make sure are done, so that you're not miscommunicating. If that one random subdomain that you didn't remember, now they're getting different information and the family's confused. Like, there's a lot of check boxes that you're going to need to do to make sure that everyone's got the same message and it's all flowing in one direction. I'd be interested, how did that work for you, those first steps in Massachusetts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think Jack makes an incredibly strong point here, that if you're going to do this, you got to, use the resources you have to make sure you get the word out. And I think that we can't stress that enough. To do something like this and then to not promote it would just be a waste of time and probably not terribly successful. I'm feeling the struggle with this right now because we're doing the boarding tuition reset as well, and that's a lot more risk involved, and it's a lot more money and potential loss involved. And we have really recommitted and worked with the board and my head of school to make sure that we have the money to do the marketing we need to do on a national basis and a little bit international, because we really need to make this, that's a much broader reach, right? But in Massachusetts for the day, it was the day student outreach. We did a lot of local outreach to, feeder schools that we work with, and make sure that the placement people have all that information, how exciting this is. We did press releases. We did all of the local newspapers, even the little kind of penny saver small newspapers in different towns, press releases, articles, really, really robust social media presence. So all of our socials had announcements about this. We're using the catchphrase, same mission, lower tuition. So nobody can steal that now. It's but it was a really a great marketing campaign that my marketing team came up with that really illustrated what we're trying to do here, and that it's about accessibility and that our program is still amazing. It's just not going to cost as much. We did several radio spots. I just heard myself on the radio today, so that was kind of weird.
Nice. Celebrity sighting.
I got into some of the, I think I missed my calling, but I got into some of the local radio stations, all of them, the Country Channel, the Oldies Channel, NPR we're doing stuff on. I've done some interviews online. I've done things like this, of course.
Yep.
And as Jack mentioned, we had a billboard, and when I talked to Jack earlier in the fall, I was actually driving back from New Hampshire, and we were like cutting out on the phone, and I was like, just get a billboard. You wouldn't believe how cheap they are. I mean, relatively speaking, you can. Yeah. It's something that I was thinking, oh gosh, this is going to be totally out of our range, and I really do feel like it's hard to track who's coming from the billboard, because somebody's not going to probably come to your tour and say, oh, I saw this billboard, but sometimes they do.
Yeah.
But we have seen a great deal of interest in the local market in 1 year. I mean, I was shocked with how well the marketing worked, and it wasn't that expensive.
Right. I'd be curious to find out, some of the strategies behind it. I know that the principle was get everything out there, blast the community with this branding and this new tuition, reset, or, your slogan that you have. Was there overarching strategy? I know from personally, with Jack, we started with current families and we moved on, and how did that work? On your end, Kristen, with just kind of an overall strategy of what you were going to focus on, even if it was something media wise, like we want to focus on this kind of media and things like this.
Yeah, good question. So we definitely worked with our current families first. So I kind of forgot to mention that. That was a really important piece, that we made sure that this announcement was super exciting for them, and that this was about also helping them have a sustainable experience financially at our school. So we definitely did all kinds of communications with our internal community, our current families. That was really, really well received, and families were very excited about it. And it was kind of a relief for many of the families. And then after that, we decided to do the external marketing. Oh, no, actually, we also communicated with our alumni base, because it's really important that I think that's something that I actually was going to forget about doing. And my development and alumni office was like, we should probably let the alums know before this gets out too widely, because it's a big change for the school, and it's a big initiative. So we did do some communication with those constituents as well. And then the plan was really to, I think social media was our big platform. We did a lot of online marketing of this, both international, for the day reset, all local, on our Instagram and our Facebook, on Twitter. And then the radio seems to be a pretty big deal in this area. So I think that's the other
right.
When you're thinking about this, you have to know your market and where people are getting their information and what they're doing. And the local radio stations have a lot of advertising on them, and all of the local schools. I get up in the morning and I listen to one of the local channels here in the Pioneer Valley, and I hear from, Northfield, Mount Herman, and the Bement School, and Deerfield. All of these local boarding schools in my area all have, a presence on these local stations. And I think folks really do listen to the radio a lot around here. So that was a big target for us as well. And then, of course, print media and, reaching out to the feeder schools and consultants to keep them in the loop. Yeah.
Yeah, informing those connections is going to be key. Layering that, like you were saying, from current families, alumni, going on, like you said, your agents, the international piece. I mean, that is, the boarding piece. That is a gigantic task to take on, as far as the communication. Relative to your local region, there's the medians. How are people consuming information and getting the word out? When you talk broadly speaking, now your budget goes way up, and now because your reach is so much greater. Your universe size is going to be so much greater, and how you're able to target them as well. Jack, was it similar strategies? What were some things that I guess worked well for you that we were employing, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, social media, I think, was probably the biggest one. And one of the things that I loved to hear from families is, they saw an ad here, they saw an ad there, and so that really kind of told us that we were really getting the word out. We didn't do any print. We did a billboard, as I mentioned. We didn't do any kind of radio. I don't know how popular NPR here is in Arkansas. And to be honest with you, the way
maybe not that popular.
It might be. I don't listen to it. I mean, I also, like, how many people actually listen to their radios and don't have like XM and Sirius and all that. So the school historically spent way too much money on print and stuff like that. And we just went in another direction. And so we were trying to get the best bang for our dollar. And, we'll continue to push it on the social media platforms as much as we can. And I think what helped us, and you and I talked about this, Jesse, or your team and I talked about it, is like, you guys take care of the 30,000 foot view, and let me take care of the organic, like our families, which is word of mouth is huge for us here. And so basically we were hitting people as much as we could, or getting them, being out there in the open, exposing ourselves and really getting ourselves out there.
Yeah, I think it's important on both ends, and it sounds like a little bit of urban versus rural, as far as the media mixes that are concerned, and then you also have to take into a fact that on both cases social media is a huge driver of this. As far as the parents' generation that you're trying to reach, that's where we are.
Yeah.
I live on this thing all day, and that those are good untapped markets, and it's a good way to get your reach out for cheap. So I think in both situations that really helped you guys out. I think that the market that you had up in Massachusetts, like that they have that radio listening environments. In Northwest Arkansas, they have their stuff, and I think that if considering doing this and implementing it, obviously you need to understand how to get your message out most efficiently, and it may vary depending on where you are on some of those tactics that you use. But brass tacks, Kristen, I'll start with you. How has enrollments improved, not improved? Like what does this look like? Since we've implemented this and we've gone through the strategy, how has enrollment been? Because at the end of the day, that's the real goal with kind of making this shift.
Right. So I'll talk specifically about day because the boarding has just been announced, so we can't really.
That's not to do with your communication. The boarding is a whole other animal.
We'll talk next year at this time, and hopefully. Yeah. I'll have the same kind of news, but we'll see. So in our first year, even in the midst of a pandemic, we increased our day application pool by over 50%, which was remarkable. I mean, I just think that was not my expectation. I was thinking, 25, 30%. Right. And we, doubled our enrollment in our middle school. And so that was really where we needed to, because that is a direct feeder into our 9th grade. So we, our middle school was struggling with enrollment for a while. And now we have a robust middle school that is twice as large as it was last year. Wow. And, significantly, the families that enrolled, our day families that enrolled, 48% more of those families than the year previous were paying the full tuition. So to me, we went from 36,000 to 22,005 for upper school and 18,500 for middle school. That's big. That's like 40%. Yeah. That's a 40% decrease. But we doubled the enrollment, and 50% of the families that are day in our enrollment right now are paying the full tuition. So we're not using the financial aid for those families. They actually can pay the tuition. We can use financial aid in other ways to attract different students from different areas, certainly to help with our boarding recruitment, and to help attract some local students that can't pay the 22. We still have the financial aid there, but we're not using nearly as much. And the interest has continued to grow. I mean, our 7th grade pipeline right now is huge. I mean, it's just, and it is like Jack said, and I think most places, word of mouth is so huge.
Yep.
So you get one kid applying from a little feeder school that has 10 rising 7th graders, and they're all going to apply. And so, it's just about, getting them through the pipeline and yielding them. But we had no financial loss whatsoever. And we brought in an additional a little over $100,000 in revenue in the first year, which is not a huge amount, like I said, but it's no loss. I mean, we were thinking even. I mean, it's no loss, and as time goes on, we'll continue to see more of that. It'll be far more than 100,000 this year, but I mean, that was a pretty good win for the first year out.
No, absolutely. I mean, those are huge numbers in enrollments. Your percentages of families on financial aid, getting driven so much away from that. That's huge. I mean, that's why you did it. That's it's nice to see why you did something like that. And then you're only going to build word of mouth. I mean, you're going to get more students, and they're all going to talk. And, then it's on you as a school, as an institution, to, give that value proposition and make sure you're retaining those students and giving them that experience that's making them never want to leave again and go anywhere else. So, Jack, on your end, I know we're in the process of that, but how have your enrollment effects been compared to prior years, or any historical data on how things are going now?
Yeah, so I mean, everything's been positive. I would say that if you look at overall numbers, we're at 285, which is probably definitely where we want to be at right now. To give you an example, last year on June 1st, we're at 300. So we're 15 away from getting where we were 3 months from now. And obviously it's the pandemic, but it goes back to the data. We know that if we can cut our attrition down, get those families to re-enroll, we historically do 85 to 100 new students. Now we're talking about a 420 student enrollment. And so, we're now talking about exactly what Kristen's talking about, the $100,000 in the black. Like those are the things that we're thinking about. Now we still have a long ways to go, but I'd rather be where we are right now than where we were a year ago or 2 years ago. And so there's just lots of things, lots of pieces in that puzzle that we've got to, let play out.
As a follow-up to this, how has, it sounds like everything is going well with current families, but on the retention side, has this really been a driver at trying to, not lose those, I don't know, depending on, 5%, 8% of kids, not losing those, really affects the boost in enrollments, when you have those new students. How has that been looking on your end?
Well, if you take a look at, we have soft deadlines, which, we tell people they have to get their stuff in by, and we let the deadline, come up, and then it was like, if you don't re-enroll, this is how many tours we've given, this is how many applications we've given, you're in danger of losing your spot. And that, I wouldn't say that didn't go over well, but it got people saying, okay, well, I want to know the real numbers. And I said, okay, I got 3 spots in kindergarten. No, you don't. You've never been there. Well, we are now, and so now we're in a completely different game right now, and so we'll end up turning families away that are our own families because they didn't do what they were supposed to, or they're waiting. And it's all about communication too. It's not like I'm just like saying, hey, you bye, I'll see you later, but making sure we communicate with them as well.
Well, it's it's every year admissions, tracking down those last minute, contracts for current families and making sure they get them in. And it's something usually, and I don't know if this is, different usually it's the same crowd every year that you have to, you're going to have to go track down. But, Kristen, on your end, how has it helped with retention? I mean, I guess now we have, kind of 2 enrollment seasons to judge off it, right? I mean, how did it go the first time, and what's it looking like? Is it still continuing that pace, whatever that may be?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think one of the things in terms of attrition or retention, rather, that this will really help schools with, it's definitely helping us. I think it looks like that's going to be the case for Jack, is if you think about how we raise tuition. So like we've gone low enough at this point that we can still raise tuition 2 or 3% every year. I mean, that's what schools are doing typically.
Right.
If you look at over the course of, if a student joins us in 7th grade and graduates, from Stoneleigh-Burnham School in 12th grade and is with us for those, 6 years, the amount that tuition will raise in 6 years compared to the amount what tuition will be in 12th grade as opposed to what it would have been in 12th grade if our tuition was $36,000 a year, is significant. It's significant. And I just pulled my calculator out. I'm like, I know this figure, but I can't, but I can tell you the figure if somebody wants to email me about it, but it's significant.
Yeah.
That the savings over time, because our tuition is where it is right now, is going to make parents feel better about the investment they're making for 4 years or 6 years or just 2 years in middle school. So I think that will be just a natural retention tool. But we have had in the last 3 years, due to various things, excellent retention. Our retention rates have, our attrition rates have declined significantly by almost half in the last 3 years from years previous. I think that has to do with the fact that our school and our administrators are aware of what families need and what they want, and this tuition reset was definitely part of that. But I also think I think schools are really spending a lot more time thinking about attrition, and it makes it a lot easier for the admissions office to not have to replace
Absolutely.
Students every year if they only have to replace 10 or 12. Or none would be ideal, of course. So I think there's been a lot more. When I came to the school, we started a retention and attrition committee that we meet regularly and really talk about students. And we've been able to, kind of counsel students into staying rather than just saying, well, they don't want to be here, so we'll just let them go. And I think that's a big piece of it. And then, with regard to the tuition reset, I think families are feeling really good about what we're doing for them, and that we're aware of, the tuition challenges that families.
Right. That's the biggest piece. I mean, they can't come from this without feeling at least that you're listening, you understand, at least their financial burdens as an institution, and you're doing what you can to meet, those needs. You want them as valued members of the community. If it's finances, that's the only issue. Here's some solutions we have, and I think that's great. I imagine anyone that implements this, their retention would be, the current students and the current families would love something like this. It's just a no-brainer. It's really trying to fill those with some new incoming students. What is that number that you're going to need when you have retention and new students coming back? But switching gears a little bit, I really appreciate all the insights on that. At the end of the show, we always like to talk about some regional admissions things, and everything's been kind of what do you think's going to happen? What are you seeing happen? Now we're here. And we're kind of in it. We're in the spring now. Well, at least in Florida we are. So what are some realities that you guys are seeing in enrollments, this time of year in your neck of the woods? I guess I'll go with Kristen.
Oh, yeah, sure. So it is not quite spring here yet. We like to call this time of year fake spring in New England. So it feels like it. I even cleaned my deck off the other day. I think, wishful thinking, but I'm sure we'll see more snow. But yeah, I think you're right. This is the time where we're starting to really see how this is all playing out. The pandemic was hard. A lot of schools, like my own school, have been pretty much remote for the whole year. We just are welcoming students back today and this weekend, which is fantastic, and we're really excited. But what I've seen in the admissions enrollment season most significantly has been this shift in timeline. And I like how Jeff says that we have like soft deadlines, Jack. Yeah. These soft deadlines, of course, we all do. And especially with our returning families, we want them to get things in, but we also understand that there are some families that are always going to be late. I've seen this shift completely in the whole process with new families, that they're not really getting things in by the deadlines or the soft deadlines, and that they're going to need a little more time to think about it, to see how things play out in the spring. So I would anticipate that schools in New England specifically, just because that's my region, and especially around here, are going to see a much bigger second round. My school always does rolling admissions, so we always have a little bit of a second round, but I think it's going to be much larger, much more competitive second round this year. Stoneleigh-Burnham decided to extend our February 1st deadline to February 26th. And in that time period, we received a very large number of applications between February 1st and 26th. So I'm definitely seeing the shift. And I think that we're going to have to work with families much longer through the process and possibly through the summer, for families who are just waiting to see how things play out, see how vaccines happen, see how schools do when they bring everybody back to campus, see if everything goes safely. So I think there are families that are saying, I want to do this, but I'm not sure yet. And then for families that have applied, and even for some of our returning families, they're like, well, I want to wait and hold on to my contract for a little bit longer. Can I have an extension? Because I just want to see how things play out with all of those factors that I mentioned. So I definitely see a shift. And then for anyone that's working with international families and boarding families, well, that's just been, a significant decline, especially internationally, because there's just so many unknowns. And I do think, I've just in this week started getting more inquiries from international families and consultants and agents. So I do think that there's going to be a very, very late rush for international applicants that could be as late as May and June, where we start seeing real interest there. So, and I'm hopeful for that.
Yeah, the way that the vaccinations are at least getting rolled out here, by that timetable, there might be more opportunities, more of the travel bans will be gone. They won't have such a stigma over the states. We joked a lot, before you had to sell your school, and, right now you're kind of having to sell the nation as well, saying, hey, this is the place, we'll be fine. Everything's safe here. My community and the school we have X, Y, and Z safety precautions. It's an interesting point that you made, just to kind of piggyback a little bit. We talk about new students that have come in, from public school environments or from different environments that are giving independent schools a chance because of, they're just rolling out things better with this pandemic. And, you focus a lot on, acclimating them to a process they don't know about in as far as being a student and how things go and how things function, because it's very differently. The admissions process, I imagine, would be there's probably some of a lot more hand-holding with these groups of families, because they're not used to it. It's not like they're coming from another private school and they're coming over here to this independent school. We moved to the area. They don't know this process, and it might be overwhelming for them. You're not automatically accepted. You got to give us some documents. We're going to have an interview. Like all of these kind of things might be some interesting things that the admissions departments are having to deal with these new families. But I agree. I think the general theme, at least in your area, is going to be wait and see. What is going to happen? Where are we going to be? I don't want to make decisions yet because it's too early. I don't know, Jack, is it similar in your area, or you have some other unique qualities that are going on in enrollment there?
The people that I talk to, it's not just in this area. I've talked to quite a bit of other people, like in New England and Florida and some on the West Coast. It's all about safety. We opened. There's not a lot of people that thought we were going to open on time, and we stuck to our guns, and we went after that. We got the date down, and we said, unless like everything just falls through the floor, we're going to open. And to still be open and only have like a certain amount of cases and not having to close for any kind of quarantine. We had to close for a snowstorm, but we were able to do the distance learning. So we learned a lot about ourselves during this process. And so what we were able to do is really not just with our returning families, but the new families that are at public school and, the class sizes are still too big, is to show them we know what we're doing. We're not perfect. We can't control COVID. But when your child walks through these doors that day or any particular day, they're going to be safe to a certain degree. Obviously we can't control everything.
Right.
And so, the public school kids that we got from COVID, we're keeping. They're not going back to public. And so that's been great. But then you also have, you can flip on the news channel right now and you can probably see there's a lot of states, Arkansas is one of them, that, is thinking about relaxing social distancing and masks. And I'm not going to get political, but people aren't going to feel safe. And so if we can still maintain that, we've made the decision that even if Arkansas says at the end of March, you don't have to wear a mask, if you want to come to the school, you're going to wear a mask. You're going to social distance. You're going to do the things that we're going to do. And, I talked to, and I'll finish it up with this. I talked to a parent the other day whose kid is doing lacrosse with me 3 times a week at the local lacrosse thing. And he said, we're not ready to send him to lacrosse. And I said, well, tell me what's going on. And he's like, we're thinking about you guys. We're thinking about your school. Like, we don't want to send him to a public venue and, have him get sick and bring it back to school. So the parents or constituents, the community is thinking about, one, probably they don't want their kids home anymore.
Right.
And 2, they want to be able to continue, bring them to the school because it's so important, not just academically, but socially, for these kids to be on campus.
No, that's a great point. I think, safety is going to be an issue, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in these states. And I, not to be on one side or the other, but those kind of decisions are definitely going to have an effect on enrollments. It's just in the same ways that it did with public schools last fall, and what they were doing in your local area compared to others. You got that COVID boom. So, real interesting points. Guys, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I know it's a very busy time of year. I wish you all the best and thank you. I hope everyone learned something today about tuition resets and how to approach them. I really appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much,
Jesse.
Good to see you, Jack.
Well, that'll do it for us today. I hope you enjoyed the show. As always, you can go to schoolcraftdigital.com to see the full episode. We will also be on our YouTube channel and any of our social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much.